All right, I'll call the meeting to order. Madam Secretary, if we could get a roll call when you have a chance.
Mr. Ackerson?
Here.
Ms. Spillman? Here. Mr. Fell? Mr. Fitch?
Here.
Mr. Hopkins? Here. Ms. Wadrago? Mr. Turner?
Here.
Mr. Weisskopf? And Ms. Hugh?
Here.
We do have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda? The minutes from the January 10th, 2019 Plan Commission meeting. Motion by Mr. Turner.
Second.
Second, Mr. Hopkins. Any changes to the minutes? We'll do this by voice vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the minutes are approved. Do we have any communications? Continued public hearings. Plan case number 2359T18, an application by the zoning administrator to amend the zoning ordinance with changes to Article 2, Article 5, and Article 6, and other relevant sections to facilitate solar energy system installation. This case is continued to the February 21st, 2019 regular meeting. We don't have any old business. We do have a new public hearing tonight. We have Plan Case 2361 M18 and 2362 SU18. A request by Rail Development Corporation to rezone approximately 1.5 acres from B2 and R4 to B3 general business, and for a special use permit to allow multifamily residential use in the B3 district at 802, 804, 806, 808, 810, 812, 814, 816 Clark Street, and 406, 406 and a half, and 408 North Lincoln Avenue. So, Mr. Garcia.
Okay, good evening. Okay, so this is a request for a rezoning and a special use permit to allow a mixed unit development on the block that's at the southeast corner of University and Lincoln Avenue. You can see the site here on Exhibit A, surrounded in yellow. So it's University, Clark, Lincoln, and Busey are the bounds of the site. And this development, in these cases would allow a mixed-use development with apartments and an extended stay hotel and retail. Currently, if you look to Exhibit B, currently these parcels are sort of a mixture of the B3 general business, B2 neighborhood business arterial, and R4, which is a medium-density multi-family residential. The rezoning request would rezone all of the B2 and R4 parcels to B3, which would match with the northern parcels. Now in the B3 district, multifamily housing is only allowed with a special use permit, hence the request for a special use permit as the second case that we're hearing tonight. As a side note, if you go back to Exhibit A, as a side note, the developer does also plan to do a by right townhome development, which is on the south side of Clark Street. But since that is by right, that's not subject to either of the requests tonight. On January 15th, the developer did hold an open house at the St. Patrick Catholic Church. Over 50 people attended that open house, and the developer presented their project, answered a series of questions from the public. And I did want to note that two of the main concerns at that meeting were parking and traffic. To the first point, the proposed development will meet the city's parking requirements. And to the second point, the developer is working with traffic engineers and with our city engineers to develop a traffic impact analysis. And they're willing to help address traffic issues that analysis might bring to light. So this site consists of several parcels. I'll go back to Exhibit A here. So you'll see it's many parcels. It's approximately 1.5 acres. As I mentioned, it's east of Lincoln, south of University. And right now it contains a mixture of, there's some smaller scale commercial buildings sort of on the northwest. Then there's single-family residential and some apartment uses. I believe they're all rental along Clark Street. In the surrounding area, you've got sort of the Carl Hospital Complex sort of to the north, northeast, and east of the site. On the west side, immediately west on the corner of Lincoln University, you've got the Einstein Bagel building. That's a commercial building. To the south are it's mostly single-family residential, again, rentals. That's the area the developer plans to do as a by-right townhome development. The proposed use, if you'll look to Exhibit E, that shows a site plan. So the proposed use would be a little over 200 apartments, 40 extended stay hotel rooms, and some retail space that would be accessory to the hotel. And the building would be 5 stories tall as well. Onto the rezoning criteria, which if you're following along, you start on page 3. I'm going to try and go through these briefly. I won't read all of the criteria themselves. I'll just say number 1, number 2, etc. So for criteria number 1 for the rezoning, rezoning to the B3 district would be compatible with the zoning and the land uses in the surrounding area. So we feel that this criterion weighs in favor of the proposed rezoning. Number 2, the B3 zoning would allow more business uses on the property. It would also allow, with a special use permit, it would allow the proposed apartments to be built. Currently, with the zoning of B2 and R4, the properties are underdeveloped and probably do not enhance the value of surrounding properties. It's unlikely that the rezoning would diminish the value of surrounding properties as well. And if anything, the rezoning would make it more likely that the parcels get redeveloped in a way that could increase nearby property values. So this criterion weighs in favor of the proposed rezoning. For criterion number 3, the proposed rezoning would not harm the health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the public. The current zoning already allows businesses and multifamily uses, though not really in a unified development. And it is unlikely that the rezoning would affect the general welfare of the public beyond what is currently allowed. So this criterion weighs in favor of the proposed rezoning. Number 4, the rezoning would allow the redevelopment of an underutilized block at one of the most significant street intersections in Urbana. The redevelopment could be very beneficial to the public, especially if the proposed development gets built. So this criterion weighs in favor of the proposed rezoning. Number 5, the properties are well suited for commercial uses, which the B3 district allows. The site is on the important corner of Lincoln and University Avenues, and rezoning the parcels along the north side of Clark Street would allow the entire site to be redeveloped in a cohesive development, which is currently difficult given the mixture of 3 different zones there. So this criterion weighs in favor of the proposed rezoning. Number 6, this deals with the vacancy of the parcels, but the parcels are not vacant. However, they are underdeveloped given the important location that they're at. You'll recall there have been several attempts to rezone these parcels in the past, but those were more what I'll call speculative rezonings. There wasn't really any proposed development in hand, like in this case. So this criterion weighs in favor of the proposed rezoning. Number 7, Urbana has few options for extended stay hotels, especially so close to the university and to the 2 hospitals, which would likely be served by an extended stay hotel. There have been quite a few apartment developments in Urbana and also in Champaign recently, but the proposed development is really very close to the University of Illinois. It's also close to both hospitals, as I mentioned. and is likely to be attractive to people who want to live near one of those campuses. And also, with the addition of some cafe or retail space, that would also be desirable in this location. So we feel this criterion weighs in favor of the proposed rezoning. Number 8, final rezoning criteria. The 2005 comprehensive plan identifies these parcels as community business. Let me go to that exhibit. So it identifies these parcels as community business. It also makes, there's also a special note surrounding the intersection of University and Lincoln Avenue that says that intersection should be promoted as a gateway to the University District through architecture and urban design of mixed-use redevelopment. The proposed development is a mixed-use development. The way that it's designed, the front of the building, which faces the Lincoln University corner, is designed to complement the commercial building that's across the street, sort of to provide that mixed-use gateway that was discussed in the comprehensive plan. So we feel this criterion weighs in favor of the proposed rezoning. Okay, now for the requirements for a special use permit, which are shorter in number. There's only 3 of these. So the first one asks if the proposed use is conducive to the public convenience at that location. This property is located, again, at a very important intersection in Urbana, and adding apartments, retail, and an extended stay hotel to this corner would be beneficial to the public. The retail space that's proposed would add to the commercial mix along University Avenue, and the apartments and extended stay units will add more customers for nearby businesses. Again, this area is designated as community business and as a gateway to the University District, and the proposed building would help provide that gateway. Number 2, the proposed use will not be injurious to the public at this location. The area is highly suitable for commercial and residential uses, and the addition of the 40 extended stay hotel rooms so close to the hospitals and the university would be beneficial to the public. And finally, number 3, the character of the B3 district would be preserved and enhanced with the proposed use. The development must meet all the requirements for setbacks, screening, parking, drainage, and all other applicable development requirements prior to construction. So the options that the Plan Commission has in this case are to, in the rezoning case, 2361 M18, are to recommend approval for the request as presented, or to recommend denial of the request. For the special use permit, 2362 SU18, the Plan Commission can recommend approval of the special use permit without any conditions. You can recommend approval of the special use permit with conditions, or you can recommend denial of the special use permit. Staff recommends that in the first case, the rezoning case, the Plan Commission forward the case to council with a recommendation for approval. And in the special use permit case, that the Plan Commission forward the case to the City Council with a recommendation for approval with the following conditions. And I believe everybody on the commission received the revised recommended conditions. So the first one is the same. It's that the development shall be constructed in general conformance with the attached site plans and renderings. The second would be that the developer shall submit a traffic impact analysis prior to the city issuing any building permits. And the third is that the developer shall adequately mitigate negative impacts the traffic impact analysis anticipates prior to the city issuing a certificate of occupancy. That concludes my report, and I can take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia.
Thanks.
Mr. Ackerson.
I just want to say thanks for already addressing one of my questions, because I was at the meeting at St. Pat's, and traffic was on my list to ask about, so I see you're recommending that. My question is this recommendation that the traffic impact analysis, is this something that just the developer will do, or they'll do it jointly with the city? How do you envision that being
Yeah.
conducted, or should I save that for the developer?
Well, that's a good question. I can answer that one. So the way that the traffic impact analysis will work is the developer will work with a consultant, and there's a specific, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know all the specifics, but there are specific steps that need to be followed by the consultant to develop the traffic impact analysis, and then our staff will review and make sure that they've followed the necessary steps so that it's actually acceptable.
Thank you. Mr. Hopkins?
The property to the northeast of the railway right-of-way is exempt. That's Carl or the city?
I think it's owned by IDOT.
Oh, it's IDOT?
There was a recent change, and I believe that is the last that I saw, yes. They had been requiring, acquiring right-of-way throughout University Avenue in order to support their safety improvements, so I'm guessing that might have come as a result.
Okay, and remind me what the status of the railroad right-of-way is?
It's active. It's lightly used, but
That's my impression, okay.
yeah.
The plans, this may be for later, but the plans ignore the existence of the railroad and show improvements on IDOT property?
You're correct in that some improvements are shown sort of up here. I think that's kind of conceptual. That's not part
Okay,
of the.
so we can
yeah.
deal with that later. I
Yes,
just,
correct.
well, I want to make sure, okay.
Further questions for Mr. Garcia? Mr. Turner?
Is there a zoning that would encompass everything that is planned for here that's not B3, so we wouldn't have to do a special use permit?
It's possible.
I'm just curious.
It's possible in the B3U, maybe, or I guess B4, but that wouldn't make sense here because that's central business. I think the thinking here is probably, since half of it's already zoned B3, just go for the rezoning of the parcels along Clark and then go for the special use permit.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Hopkins?
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. So there is not a specific reason other than current zoning why we're not going to B3U? The only differences are there is a very small open space ratio requirement in B3U, which is 0 in B3. There are a few uses in B3 that are not in B3U, but none of them matter here. And so but again, this is for later unless there's a simple answer. And I'm seeing no simple answer, so
All right,
it's for later.
For discussion, yeah. Okay. Any further questions? Thanks. I've got a couple. So the site plan shows parking on the north side of Clark.
Yes.
Am I correct that right now parking's not allowed on the north side of Clark? I went by there and didn't see anybody parked there, and it looks like the aerial photo, no one's parked there.
Yeah, that's correct. And our engineers can work with the developer on any sort of street.
Is there a plan to widen it,
street
make it
changes.
cut out?
No, I think the plan is to keep parking just on one side. The way this is drawn up here has parking sort of alternate between the south. So on the west side, I think there would be some parking on the south.
Right.
And then it flips to the north.
Hmm.
But that's all conceptual.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I was wondering about Busey. Is there any anticipated street parking there, or other improvements such as sidewalks, anything of that nature?
Not, you mean as part of this development?
Correct.
Or not that I know of.
And they're not required to put in sidewalks in this case?
I'll want to double check that before we answer on the record.
Okay, thanks. Those are really the two things I had were about those two streets that are, and we'll talk about it some more. Any further questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Garcia.
Okay, thanks.
I want to remind everybody of the procedures for a public hearing. The petitioner will present evidence to support their request. Following that, anyone who wishes to speak in support of the petition will be heard by the Plan Commission. After that, anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the position will be allowed to address the Commission. Following that, the petitioner will have the chance to make a final argument, and then we'll close the public input hearing and discuss and possibly vote. Now, so I did want to ask, how many people in the audience think you would want to address the Commission tonight? Sure. Yeah, I figured they got diagrams and everything else. So, okay, we won't put a hard time limit on it. We'll just ask you to, it's only 4 or 5 of you. That's all right. But so, all right. So come up, and if you would state your names and sign the paper for the minutes, that would be great.
Good evening. Do I have to push this?
No, it should be on.
Okay. Okay. Good evening. My name is Graham Rail with Rail Development Corporation. We're the development company. And this is,
I'm Jarrett Cooper with Roseman and Associates Architects.
Okay.
so we appreciate the opportunity to present this project to you. Mr. Garcia, I think, really summed up, most of the technical parts quite well. So maybe I'll just give you a little bit of the flavor of the project, why we want to do what we're doing here. As Mr. Garcia stated, first and foremost, we really wanted to give the corner of Lincoln and University the attention it deserved. We see that as a gateway, and architecturally, and also even with the use having our lobby space and the retail within that lobby being at that corner, we really intended on activating that corner. But the other thing we saw as we got into this project and we worked closely with the city is that clearly the historic district that is to our south is an important component of this area, and we really tried to break the project down into a few components, if you will. As you go from University and Lincoln and then you cross Clark Street, we've brought the scale down. We've tried to mix the architecture. I realize this is not about architecture, but just from a density and scale. And then we wanted to maintain that Clark Street. That cobblestone feel was really a key piece of this, I would say, the soul of the project, to make that feel pedestrian. Mr. Fitch, to answer one of your earlier questions, why we have parking that's on both sides of the street is we intended on maybe slowing that street, making it feel more pedestrian, so have it meander, just a little bit. That was the design intent. But of course, we look forward to working with staff on the traffic analysis, and we'll address that. Mr. Hopkins, just to address your question on that triangular piece on the other side of the railroad track, that is just illustrative. Ideally, that would be a strong connection, again, maybe even a little bit more pedestrian between the Carl Hospital and our site. But that's not part of our project, and maybe we can explore that down the line. But again, the whole idea here was because we are, so close to the university and also Carl, and within this neighborhood, we wanted to do this mix of uses. We see that the extended stay component will be strong. We actually met with Carl Hospital today. They're very excited about the project, and there's we feel like there's a nice synergy between the multifamily and our lobby, which is at the corner, will be, it's a lobby for all. It's our residential lobby as well as the hotel lobby, and we feel that it will be an active and a very active space, and hopefully an asset to the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Graham summed it up very well. He does a great job of describing the property. So I would just offer that if you have any questions, any specific questions that you'd like to ask about the project, I'd be here to answer.
Great. Any questions for Mr. Rail and Mr. Cooper? Mr. Hopkins?
What we have is renderings. In many cases, with a special use permit, as is recommended, we talk about an attached site plan.
Mhm.
So the closest thing we have to a site plan is what's on the screen at the moment. We know that the part northeast is not part of the site plan. We don't have a sidewalk on Busey, which, from a special use permit point of view, ought to be there, whether it's required or not. We have parking. Have you actually done measured site plan drawings to know that you're meeting the parking requirements with this configuration?
Yes, sir, we have. Actually, this drawing it started as a lot of these conceptual drawings do. It started with an actual site plan, a hardline site plan, and then we worked our way into it. One thing that doesn't show clearly on this, because we're showing the rooftop of the building, is that there is additional parking that's within the first level of the building on the lower L along Clark Street. So we do have additional parking that's actually interior parking on the first level.
And that's accessed where?
That's accessed either from the main drive court off of Clark Street, or you can also access it from that larger parking area that's on the back side of the property towards the railroad tracks right now. So there are multiple entry points into it. It's the L-shaped area, and I wish I had a pointer here.
Under the part that's labeled residential?
Correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But
So there's additional parking.
I don't see,
So,
where's the access?
so when
The
you drive,
access is at the east end?
where is the mouse? Here we go. So, if it shows up here. So you can see this is the main entrance drive, and there's some parking here and
Yes.
parking here. There's an access point right here.
Okay.
This area is actually parking all the way up to that area and access it out to this drive.
Okay.
And then it's parking back in here under this terrace,
Okay.
and then back across this side all the way to the end and access back out again. So there's several, there's a lot more parking here than it appears just by this site plan. And so we did do the analysis. We do meet all of the parking requirements for this development between the two sites. We've got the parking covered.
Okay, and can you show us the elevation, the south elevation, that is actually all parking, it turns out?
We have a view that shows towards it. Kevin, did you happen to put those in here? There we go. So, there you go. So this area is that entrance drive
Yes.
that circles back in. So starting at approximately right here and then moving that way, that is parking behind that first floor wall.
So what looks like windows are actually openings,
Those are openings, right?
okay? And what's at the corner with the awnings?
At this corner,
Yes,
this area is another entrance area. There's a small commercial space in that section that right now is slated to be an amenity area for
what?
an amenity area for the students and for the hotel guests. So that will be a secondary entrance point along with the mail center for the residents in the building as well as another amenity space.
So that's the main entrance really for the residential apartments?
It's an entrance for the residential. The main entrance is still considered over here at this point and then tucked into the back corner behind, in that drive court.
But the residents are not going to go in that
A lot of
other
them will
entrance
just
'cause
go
they're gonna
straight
be
to this
coming from the
entrance,
other
absolutely.
direction.
Both, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all of that at the moment.
Ms. Billman?
What does amenity area mean?
It's all of the things that you would typically find in an apartment community, such as a business center or a fitness center, and some of that. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, and a hotel lobby. So it's the functions like the cafe, coffee shop, lobby, lounge. We will have meeting rooms that will also serve as, study rooms, fitness. Those are the amenities of the project.
Where do you envision the retail space?
It's
Is that
primarily.
the same thing?
It's actually it's part of that space. Let's see if we there you go. So the primary retail spaces. This is the corner of University and Lincoln. So this area is one of the primary retail bays. We think this will probably be coffee shop amenity area as well, but it does continue down through this storefront space, which is also a lot more of the hotel lobby, hotel amenities.
Any further questions? Mr. Ackerson?
You said you met with Carl. Have you talked to OSF yet?
I have not.
Okay. So the feedback from Carl, you said it was positive, but could you be more specific? Did they, yay, we're glad you're doing this? Did
Yeah.
they talk about, say, the extended stay hotel versus the residences? What were they enthusiastic about?
They were enthusiastic about each of the components. First of all, the extended stay, but also we talked about the apartments being so near to them, that they've got residents now, and we talked about the growth of the medical school, that really obviously will have a strong connection to Carl. We talked about the townhomes, how there are, could be potentially, families coming in, working there. So they were generally pleased. We talked a lot about the use of the retail actually on the corner, and how they would love to see, a restaurant there if possible. That was the feedback. Very positive. It was a very nice meeting.
Any further?
I have a question about
Ms. Yu?
the extended stay hotel. How would that operate similar or different from just an ordinary hotel?
The answer is it's not terribly different. The difference is we've got the ability to have longer stays because they will have kitchens. So we call it extended stay because, we anticipate that people could stay there for, rather than just a night, a week at a time, 30 days at a time, because it's larger than a typical apartment, a typical hotel room.
Okay, so just by providing more amenity in the room, if they choose to stay longer, they will have those basic
That's right.
kitchenette.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Turner?
I wasn't able to make it to the meeting at St. Patrick's that happened, so I was curious about traffic and parking were mentioned as kind of two primary concerns. What were some of the other main concerns that came up during that meeting, and how were they addressed?
Yeah, I think one of the other main concerns was the proximity to the homes on Main Street, the backyards of Main Street, and although this what we're talking about tonight is actually on the other side of Clark, we did discuss that, and so we talked about different opportunities to provide screening for the residents to their backyards. We had originally proposed that there be a landscape buffer between the two, but it sounded like more from the neighborhood or from the residents that were there that a privacy wall of some type would be more appropriate. And so we'd certainly be looking at opportunities to provide that and work with the neighbors to mitigate any of those sightline issues.
Mr. Turner? All right. Anything further? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Does anybody wish to speak to the Plan Commission in support of this request? Does anybody wish to speak to the Plan Commission in opposition or with concerns in regard to this request? Please.
Give it a go.
All right. Well, I know who you are, but if you could sign the paper and state your name for the cameras and for the minutes.
I have a long name, sorry.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne Bissonette. I live at 804 West Main with my husband and family. That's the Matthew and Sarah Busey house. So we are on the south side of Maine, and so we'll have a great view of a 5-story building. Just to tell you a little bit about myself and why I have concerns. I've been a community member here since 1985, and we have spent the entire time actually in Urbana, except for just a little tiny stint during grad school where we went over to Champaign for 2 years, and then we came immediately back. So we've lived on Main Street in the Busey house since 1992. This home was built in 1869, and this is its 150th year. So originally this was a farm, actually, and the entire property here that's being considered actually was part of their property originally. Just a little historic note there. We've raised 3 children in this home and in this neighborhood. So the reason we actually moved to that neighborhood was at the time we checked into the zoning, and the zoning had, the city wanted that particular neighborhood to remain as a neighborhood, and they had returned many properties to single-family zoning. We checked into that before we moved into the neighborhood, or we wouldn't have moved in. So we have always been in a neighborhood, you know, with that protection of the single-family zoning, and there's always been mixed zoning as well. So we have participated, you know, in the city because we live in a historic house. We have welcomed many times through open houses in cooperation with PACA and whatnot. We've had hundreds and hundreds of people through our house, you know, for open houses for the city, for garden walks, that sort of, you know, that sort of thing. We have a very diverse neighborhood, both in terms of income, different jobs, where people are from. We're both demographically and fiscally diverse. We've gotten to know a lot of students through the years. Obviously, there's a lot of rental properties in the neighborhood. It's been our pleasure to do so. We own 2 other properties as well that you also were asking questions about. We own 802 West Main, which is a little Cape Cod, which is a rental house. It's right on the corner of Busey and Main. And we own the property just to the north of that, 305 North Kohler, which we've since annexed to our property at 804. So we have kind of a big square there as well. So this truly is a neighborhood. We have good neighbors. We have parties. We care for each other. We've been through, you know, health issues. We've been through death. We've gotten to know people through the years and raised our families there. We're also very well acquainted with overcrowding, parking issues, and congestion. It is a daily part of our life. All right. We all know how to do the 5-car in the driveway backup, like, you know, because the first person needs to go. We don't happen to have a garage. So we're well acquainted with overcrowded street parking. You know, the location is, of course, near the university, and we do have students who park there, right next to Carl and, of course, St. Patrick's. And even with the addition of the large parking lot to St. Patrick's, we still do get a lot of St. Pat's parking, and we get Carl parking every day. So as a commission, you know, I know you have to judge based on the LaSalle criteria, and I went, you know, kind of nuts, and I actually, you know, like printed them off and everything, although I think my spouse will tell you he did serve on the zoning commission for like 13 years, so we're kind of well acquainted with that. But I want to thank you, you know, and for listening to what's going to be my opposition to this zoning. And rather than reading from these originally printed ones, which, this is a lot of legal, sort of hard, there's a very nicely prepared document, so thank you for that. But and I'll address my concerns based on that. So just kind of starting on page 3 there, which Mr. Garcia already kind of read to you. And I'll tell you what my opposition is to the various criteria. Land use and zoning of nearby property, and they mentioned that Carl is there. Yeah, Carl is there. Carl's always been there, but it's 2 blocks away. It's not in my backyard. I can see Carl. I can see the helicopters. I can see the train. So also they mention other businesses, other B3. That's west of Lincoln. All right, most of that is west of Lincoln. Directly to the south is all single family. So I don't know if you've had the opportunity to drive up and down Clark Street or not. They really don't need to worry about slowing down traffic because the brick, while it is picturesque, is kind of like this. So if you don't care for your muffler, you can speed along there. But if you do care, you would be going, slowly anyway. So what we enjoy, in that neighborhood is all, those are our individual houses, all in the neighborhood, of 1 and 2 stories of the remaining houses on Clark. There is 1 apartment building, which is kitty corner to our property. It is a 2-story building, and it has no windows, by the way, on the south side, which is what faces our 305 property. So I think that's a little misleading that the surrounding property is already all B3. I don't think it is. With regard to property values, and this is something I take pretty seriously, so we've lived in this neighborhood. We went through bothering to turn it into a historic district. We welcome people into our neighborhood, and we've taken care to the best of our abilities of these properties. I feel like both the townhouses, which will be 3 stories, not 2 stories, 3 stories, which are allowed already. They're not asking for that. But they'll be adding 16 townhouses, 16, and then they'll be adding a 5-story building beyond that. Do I feel this diminishes our property value? I absolutely do. I have a square view right at it. So I do feel like that encroaches on our property. They're talking about adding 412 residents to that 1 block. 412. So I do feel like it does interfere with our, or will interfere with our property value. I feel it'll add unneeded congestion, interfere with our view. I guess I'll never, I actually like the train. And the train, we wave at the train every time it comes by. And he comes up to 2 times a day, usually once a day, not every day. But it's not like 0 use. I mean, that train, it still does go by. With regard to the health, safety, and morals, so we've spent, pretty much our entire adult life living in student-centric neighborhood or neighborhoods. And with students, and this is aimed, and the developer did indicate at the open house that this is aimed at students. There are things you put up with. You put up with parties. There will be the addition of trash because there's additional people. Do have the occasional, kerfuffle with people not taking care of the property and whatnot. And these are just my experiences in living, in a, what is already a, pretty high density rental area. I have significant concerns for the students. So, like I said, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to go to Clark Street or not, but it's like, how are they going to get off of Clark Street? So if you're coming from the south to the north, you can turn right on Clark Street. You cannot turn left on Lincoln, to go to the university from Clark. you cannot. Maybe at 3 in the morning you can, but not during normal business or school hours. That'd be virtually impossible. I don't know if you've ever seen people trying to cross Lincoln at that location. You take your life in your own hands, you know, trying to get over to Einstein's, for instance, trying to get across the street there. So I do have significant concerns based on the amount of traffic and, you know, the number of people that they're talking about that really does need to be addressed. Next, with regard to hardship, the public, you know, they're contending that the public will benefit from this, and I would say the public would be hard-pressed actually to benefit from this particular project. It's very difficult to get to. It's very difficult to get out of. So I see it as a location, you know, it's a highly congested and dangerous intersection. I think that's pretty well known. So because of this lack of egress and parking, I don't see it as being highly beneficial to the public. Suitability for the zoned purposes. Again, I'm worried about the egress of the students. I'm worried about the egress of the cars. So to get out of this neighborhood, and let's say you were going to the university, you would not be easily able to turn left onto Lincoln to get to the university. Busey, when it gets to Clark, all of a sudden turns into a tar road or asphalt road. You can't turn left onto University. You can turn right if you wait for a little while. So are they going to turn onto Busey? All right. So Busey has parking on the west side, and then there is parking all along St. Patrick's, the diagonal parking. There is only room for one car in between the parking on the west side of Busey Street and the diagonal parking at St. Patrick's. Additionally, as some people noted, there's no sidewalk that goes along there. So that means students walk, and this happens now. Carl employees, students, everybody, they even park for the mosque, which is 3 blocks away. They park for the mosque, you know, and they're all walking down the middle of the street because there's no sidewalk. So I worry about that, about egress from the location. So difficult site to access. Do we need this? I would say, wow, we have a lot of empty apartment buildings in that, or apartments already located in that area. You can go check out Airbnb and see how many of them are for rent. Lots of them. So I think that you know, I just am not sold on them, that there's not enough apartments for them to stay at. With regard to being a gateway, well, if it's a gateway, it doesn't match. You know, one side's going to be 5 stories, one side would be 3 stories, and then we'll have 2 more gateways. All right, we also have a gateway at Green and Lincoln. We also have the Helene Gateway at Lincoln and Illinois. So this is getting to be a lot of gateways just to get to the university. So a lot of gateways there. Not sure we need any more. So those were kind of my points. You know, I feel like the amount of congestion and I think it'll have a very detrimental effect on our property values. I really have no interest in looking at 5 stories out my window, and that, you know, that's our kitchen right there. So we'll be waving at them, and our bedrooms on that side of the house too. 5 stories, if you've stood below a 5-story building, I don't think this is something that you necessarily want right in your backyard. And I hate to be the kind of person to say, I don't want that in my backyard, but I really don't. I feel it negatively affects the historic district, and I certainly feel like it negatively affects our property values. I don't think the site is well suited for egress for as many people and units and everything else that they are proposing, and even just for the 5 stories. And then I'll kind of close with, so we had a similar issue, of course, as we were down across from Cafe Paradiso. The project they wanted to build that was 5 stories there, and it was on the east side of Lincoln, and WUNA, stood opposed to that. And so taking that into consideration, I'm curious, why are 5 stories being considered on the east side of Lincoln? We don't need 5 stories on the east side of Lincoln. They could go for 3 stories. So when I did ask that question of the developer, they're like, well, they just can't afford it. But I think you'll notice if you go have a cup of coffee at Cafe Paradiso that they did manage to build that property, and it was only 3 stories high. So,
Any questions for Ms. Bissonette?
thank you.
Ms. Billman?
I
we got
did have a
some questions.
question. Yes. You said that there would be 412 additional residents?
Correct.
Is that the way? Where did you come up with that number?
That was the number
That
they
was
gave
them?
me when I asked them. That includes the 16 townhouses and the 5-story building, which has apartment buildings, or apartments in it, and then also some extended stay residents as well.
Thank you.
I have one question. Just for clarification, are you opposed to the zoning or to the use, or both? Because this is 2 cases, and one is the zone, and then the other is the use.
Correct.
So,
Both.
okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, who would like to address the Plan Commission?
I'd be thrilled to address it.
And if you could state your name and sign the paper.
Thank you for doing all of this for Urbana. I know it's not always fun, and I know in particular this is a very hard corner especially because of the railroad going through it, but also because of Lincoln Avenue and University. Just because you get a lot of traffic doesn't make it a good commercial stop. As an example, I've lived here too long. The now medical marijuana building was Huey's. It's been sitting there for, 35 years as a tin building and has never been redeveloped for something higher, and in fact sat vacant for a long time. So just because you got a lot of traffic doesn't necessarily make it perfect for development. I know you can't consider aesthetics, but we're going to talk aesthetics in a minute. Can you show, I think you called it Exhibit C? Up. And the reason I want to do this is because I want to give the magnitude of the change we're talking about. This is not a small change. If you look in the northwest corner, the pink there, which is called community business on the city plan on the web, it's INI1, or IN-1, light industry and office district. In fact, if you've been by there, it is all housing, high-density housing. That was the water plant. So that's become very high-density housing. Now we're talking about high-density housing on this other side. So this is, I am not an engineer, but this part of town is very old. How old are the city sewers? Anybody know? 100 years? 120?
It varies. Some of them are old, some of them are new.
Were these sewers built for that kind of density, or were they built for single family?
I also am not an engineer.
Okay. So what we've done is we've taken an area that had virtually no housing and this corner which has something like 11 people in it. I don't know, probably a dozen houses maybe. And you're adding hundreds of people. And so I'm getting to a point here in a minute, but it isn't just parking. They said 412 beds. Does that include the 40 extended stay? Okay. So 412 beds, but then you also have staff and people working at this place and working in the commercial. Just for being reasonable, let's call it 500. Now you have 500 and the addition of I don't know how many on that northwest side. And you also have all the storm water. That right now is permeable. It's green. Can the sewers handle it? Can the water storms? I'll tell you, the streets flood right now. I like to go out with the dog during a rainstorm and unclog the drainage because the intersections will flood. That entire area has water problems. So what we asked at the open house was the city engineer, had they looked at any of that? And the answer was, we'll work with the developer. I think really that needs to be addressed. Those are very expensive issues. Everybody, not just Urbana, everybody underinvests in infrastructure. But my bet is this is a very old set of underwater infrastructure, and it hasn't been maintained or redone. And so who's going to pay for all of that? What happens when everything clogs up? Who's failed? Whose obligation is it? I mentioned the drip line, permeability. We already, during a big rainfall, water will pool up in our backyard. We're at 804 West Main. If you take out more permeability, I think there's going to be problems. The streets, certainly parking is a big problem. I mentioned 420 beds, so I don't know, that might be 600 people, maybe more. There were 250 spots all in for parking. Let's not kid ourselves, this is student housing. This is not a multi-family, this is going to be student housing. So imagine where our, now let's imagine that you have 2 trips a day, you go out, you come back in. You now have 1,000 cars going through Clark, and you should drive Clark because it will tear your muffler off if you go too fast, but also Busey. So for example, because Lincoln is busy, Suzanne was exactly right, the obvious thing is to go east. So I'm stupid, I need visual aids. This is Busey, and I can hand it around, taken last week at their meeting, just before. And during a normal business day, that is 1 lane. So add 1,000 cars now, 1,000 trips to that 1 lane. And the street is torn up. And people try and back up into it. And you get people going this way, and then people have to back up into Main Street or back up somehow into the church or something like that. So it's not just Clark, it's both the North Busey going north up to University, but also going all the way down to Springfield. You should drive the whole way down and do it at about 25 miles an hour, and then you'll get a new muffler. It will rip it off. It's bad. So I'm talking about infrastructure and density. I'm going to come back to that in a second. So imagine now in your house, wherever you live, now add 1,000 car trips a day. Because like I said, I'll bet most are not going to Lincoln. They're going to come out, most people want to go away from a light. So they're going to come out, probably Busey, and then turn on Main, or maybe go down to Springfield. So this is a very hard site to plan. I mean, this has been the problem and why it has failed in the past. I won't go through all the LaSalle criteria, but I do want to talk about at least 2 points. One is aesthetics, but maybe the most alarming thing to me, so my point on density is, you are not increasing density 200%, you are increasing density 200 times what is there right now. If there's 24 people there, I'll be shocked. And I'm not even talking about the northwest side on the other side of University. If you're adding 400 or 500 people, and right now you got a couple dozen, that's 200 times what you have right now. So my point is, really, this is logarithmic. This is orders of magnitude bigger. This is not just we're going to double it or up twice as much. We're up 200 times where it is right now. There are, I think, Eric Jacobson said 11 parking spots on Clark. You can't park on Main Street during the day. So usually what we do, having our kids come and go, and because who's leaving when, we park in front of the Jacobsons. We'll go out at 10 o'clock at night and move our cars there. So parking is very serious, but the whole infrastructure, the water, the stormwater, what I would call the Super Bowl flush. You got to think about all that, and is it there? Is it ready for it? One of the most alarming things in this plan case to me is I think words are important. And in this case, it says that it will improve property values because, if anything, the rezoning would make it more likely that the parcels are redeveloped. So what they're telling me is they want to redevelop Main Street. We're contiguous to this project. That's what they're telling me. I don't know that that's what they meant, but they're saying that contiguous properties should be rezoned. If you say they shouldn't be rezoned or redeveloped, then why are they more valuable? So I want you to take a deep breath and walk through the property or drive through this area. It's not very big, but the infrastructure is terrible. Suzanne hit on the aesthetics, and I want to thank architect Cooper. He was very helpful. We've had a couple of good talks. This is, again, I'm stupid. I need a picture. This is me standing on our back porch. And again, this is a 150-year-old house that was restored. It was actually condemned at one time by the city of Urbana. This was a chain link fence. When we bought it, we tore it out. We put in a cedar fence. It's 6 feet tall. They wouldn't let us put anything higher, but you could put in this lattice on top. So this fence is 8 feet tall. I'm going to hand it around. I did some photoshopping to try and get a view of 5 stories is big, guys. The 5-story in downtown is the County Plaza, that big white building. So think of that suddenly in your backyard. So architect Cooper, and I thank him again, he said, well, I'll try and do a schematic of what it would look like. So you go from this to this. And so now I have 3 or 4 stories of people looking in my backyard. I know it's a couple hundred feet away, but you get an idea of what it looks like then. So there is an aesthetic concern of who would want to buy that and move into that. Exhibit E. They're very nice drawings, and like I said, I give them I give the architect credit for trying to figure out how to make this useful. Lou, I think you mentioned, yes, the trains go right past there, and while this looks nice, there are gates on that corner. There are train gates. So it's not going to look real pristine because there's a gate right there. If it was me, and this is what I was trying to say at the other hearing, and the engineers basically walked out, they had other things to do, I understand that. I'd want to try and address all the infrastructure before you start in on a major project like this. Again, this is a couple hundred, maybe 300, 200 or 300 times bigger than what is there right now. And it really alters the whole area. And of course, it diminishes the value of our property. So, again, thank you for what you're doing. If it was I oppose, what I would urge you to do is take a deep breath, drive around there a little bit, Try and imagine what it would be like to have hundreds of more people driving and walking through there. Try and imagine what happens if the sewer is shut down, and all of that sort of thing. And I would continue this until you get some more engineering data that can assure people that it is solvable. They don't get to solve city traffic problems. The city has to do that. So before you act, you need some assurance from them. Questions?
Questions for Mr. Kangas? I see the same question that I asked Ms. Bissonette. Is it the zoning or the use or both?
Well,
Okay, great.
I actually, again, I know this is going to be redeveloped. I would like it to be redeveloped. The scale is pretty daunting. And you can see that by those two comparisons of how different that makes everything. Personally, I don't think it makes West Main viable as a historic district anymore. I just don't. That's me.
Any further questions?
So the question before you, to me, really, besides all the other things, is what is the commitment to historic preservation? Do you want this? And maybe the answer is no. And I'm not blaming anybody. Those are hard decisions.
Well, I think the ordinance is pretty clear on the importance of the historic district, so we'll discuss it.
May I just ask if we can keep these for the record, the photos?
I don't have a copy of the architect's rendering. I'd kind of like a copy of that. You can have a photograph.
Okay,
If you
well,
can at least make a photocopy, I'd like
we
to
can
see.
do that.
Can I ask a question? Why didn't you ask for that, to see what it would look like? I mean, it's a major, and I would guess, even on the other corner, we're seeing one corner, it's twice as tall as the other side of the street. So it's not a gateway, it's going to look like this.
I can't answer that. I just, yeah. An oversight, I guess. So,
Okay.
all right,
I really urge you to look at the engineering, though.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else care to address the commission? We're pretty far into this, so if we could, I don't want to cut you off, but if you could,
I'll be brief.
thank you.
I'm Daniel Folk. I live at 807 West Main, so I live on the south side of Main Street, more or less right across from the Kangases. Before I reinforce most of what Randy had to say about infrastructure, I do want to note that we will end up with R2, and not only R2, but an historic district R2, I think only about 100 feet from B3 if you approve the B3. It's awfully close. I have no idea if that's precedented in Urbana or not, but it doesn't seem like a very big buffer from single-family residential to B3. It's been pointed out that along with the development of the northwest corner of University in Lincoln, this will be a very large increase in density, both for traffic and for people. When I leave my house and need to go to the southwest, I turn east and go down to Busey and drive to Springfield. It's the only decent way to get out. And getting out of Clark Street to turn south is even worse than getting out of Main Street to turn south. So I think we need that to be considered. We need something more than we're going to work with the city on that. We need to see what the plan is for dealing with the hundreds of cars a day that are going to have to go down what is virtually a one-lane street. It's more than just the street, though. The sewer, all the subsurface and surface drainage that will be impacted by this hasn't been, to my knowledge, studied. The pipes are old. When you overload old pipes below the surface, they crack. They start to suck dirt. It undermines the street. Who will pay? Maybe it's all adequate, but nobody's studied it yet, and it's not clear to me who will pay if it fails after we add all these hundreds of people to that infrastructure. It was never clear to me whether they intend, and jumping to the subject of parking, to charge for additional fees for their parking on this project. They have adequate parking apparently, but if they charge, parking's free over on our street, and so we would anticipate people will park their cars over there. My neighbors, incidentally, we have 4 kids living next to us in a student rental. I have 6 cars because they park 2 of their friends' cars who would have to pay somewhere else to park their cars. So I think the parking, again, needs a little more study. And I think that's just about all I have to, that's about as brief as I can be. But if you've got any
That's pretty
questions,
good.
I'll be happy to answer it.
All right, any questions? No?
Notice, I
Ms.
would
Billman?
like to ask the same question about whether they're going to be charging for parking.
When they come back up.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll be brief,
Okay, thank you.
honest.
You could just state your name and sign a paper.
I'm Phyllis Williams. I live at 810 West Main with my husband, Joe.
Great.
All right, let's see. Okay, so we're at 810, so we are directly behind the R4 by right 16 townhomes. And there's a lot that I appreciate about the design that they've thrown into that, because there'll be no balconies. I think we can work with them in a buffer. I am concerned, though, because everything from our properties on the north side of Maine drain towards Clark. And so we do any kind of berming, whether that's through soil or piling up snow, could leave us in a soup bowl. And it's always been a concern, no matter who would develop the south side of Clark Street. Busey does need to be redone. We get out and we clean the gutters in the neighborhood also when there's leaves in them. And there is not enough drainage now near St. Pat's. In fact, the corner with St. Pat's has no drainage whatsoever. It just puddles up. And it was, we talked a lot about pedestrian traffic at the neighborhood meeting. And I think that is something to be considered. It's hard enough for kids to cross right now at Main and Lincoln. Clark and Lincoln is really tough, especially because traffic backs up so far, almost to Springfield during rush times, or if there's a train there. I know the day after the neighborhood meeting, then Mr. Schunkweiler was out doing a lot of measurements on Main Street. And I thought that was kind of exceptional. I guess what I'd like you to do is just kind of take a step back and let's get some city engineering input. And let's let everybody know what that input is. The developers worked with the city for quite a while before we found out through the News Gazette that this was even proposed. So we were kind of blindsided that morning. So we'd like to have let's get our ducks all in a row, and then let's have another meeting and let's see what we can do. Am I opposed to the density, the height? You bet. It should just be 3 stories to match the building on the other side of the street. Am I opposed to the special use permit? Yes, sir. Yeah. That's it.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Williams? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else wish to speak in opposition to this?
I'll also stay brief.
Thank you.
My name is Diane Pleva. I live at 607 West Ohio Street, so quite far south and not really massively impacted by this project. I just wanted to bring a couple of concerns up. And I think a lot of them have already been addressed by some of the earlier speakers, so I'm just going to bullet point them just because I do think that they're important. I'm really concerned about access. As it's been mentioned before, you can't turn south on Lincoln from Clark, you can't turn west on University from Busey. So I don't really know how that's going to work. I live on a very small street. There are 4 fraternities and sororities on my street, and you would not believe, I learned this after we bought our house, and I love my house, I'm happy to be there. But you would not believe the extra noise and the extra congestion and the extra traffic that just more people bring. Think about it, if we had 3 people talking in this room, that's doable. If you have 30 people talking in this room, that's a little noisy. And if you have 300 people talking, that's insane. So, you know, we hear students walking down the street, and they're not being loud. But at 10 o'clock, at midnight, at 2 a.m., when they're walking down the street and there are 3 or 4 of them, you hear it. Because it's just, our neighborhood's actually fairly quiet until this happens. I noticed on the rendering, I didn't see any, and this might be, these may be too preliminary, I didn't see any like dumpsters, which I am concerned about because I didn't realize this, but larger buildings have special dumpsters, which means a special dump truck, which means another piece of large machinery going down your street. And so where that's going to access, they mentioned a restaurant, they mentioned the extended stay, the hotel, a cafe potentially. How are these going to be supplied? Is there going to be a loading dock? How is access to that going to happen? And again, maybe this is getting too far into the weeds right now, but I think that these are important things for the commission to consider. I do urge you to consider also things like the sewage and the stormwater runoff, as has been mentioned, parking. A lot of these streets are one-way streets, essentially, during the day when you have parking on the side of the streets. And as it's been brought up, you know, most people are going to have cars, they will. And when you have that many cars and then you have multiple trips being taken per day, that just increases the chances of, well, of congestion and then, you know, potential issues. The only other kind of couple things I want to touch on briefly, a couple of things that I wanted to address. This came up in the earlier presentation that there was going to be a lobby or an area in the proposed building that would be you know, a community space. And I'm really tired of developers, and I'm speaking as someone that was somewhat actively involved in the Lincoln and Nevada building, for those of you that remember that. But I'm really tired of developers trying to spin a little bit of additional space in their building as a community benefit. It's not. It will benefit the hotel or the extended stay. It will benefit whatever cafe moves in there, whatever restaurant moves in there. For those of us that have kids, we're not going to have our third grade or our 3-year-old's birthday party in this community space. We're not going to have a graduation party in this community space. It's not something that's going to be used other than by people that are already in that area. And so really, to me, that's a benefit to the hotel. It's a benefit to the restaurant or the cafe. That's a benefit to the developers, to whoever owns that building. It's a commercial space, that's fine, but it's not community. It's not giving back to the community. And I've just seen that pop up in multiple proposals, and I feel obviously very strongly about that. The other just 2 things to quickly mention. One issue is that this sets a precedent. And to go back to something that Mr. Kangas brought up, you know, consider the importance of the historical district and then consider, is the city going to protect it? And that's not saying that developing this area means that it's not going to be protected. But my point is just that every time developers come in, the justification or the rationale is, well, there's already a large building across the street. Oh, it's kitty corner from. 2 houses down, there is another mixed-use space. 3 houses down, there is a group home. And so my point is that it sets a precedent. And we have seen this in these, in the historical district and then also in the neighborhood south of there, where there's just encroachment because, yeah, eventually every house is going to be potentially, you know, mixed use or group homes or something like that, because they will all be surrounded. And if that's the justification, that you're close to some other use, eventually the entire neighborhood could potentially be within, you know, kitty corner from or next to or 2 houses down from. So again, I just really urge you to consider the precedent that's being set in terms of allowing 5-story housing, a five-story building of any type, so close to residential, district. And finally, I just want to finish with thanking you for listening to all of our concerns, and also saying, and I know that you hear us when we complain. And I just want to say I'm going to speak for me, I can't speak for everyone else, but we live in Urbana because we love it here. We like our communities, we like our town. We are not against change, and we're not against inviting new people into the neighborhoods. I would never want anyone to feel that way. The issue is that we love these neighborhoods because of the neighborhood feel that they have, and we want to preserve that for ourselves, for our families, for future generations. And frankly, a five-story hotel mixed use, I think it's a really hard argument to say that that belongs in the backyards, or I understand this is across the street, but you know, that this belongs so close into what is, generally speaking, a fairly quiet neighborhood made up of families, students, renters, international, you know, all sorts of different types of people, but it's a residential community. And so, again, I know that you hear us when we're complaining. I appreciate that you listen to us while we're complaining, but I also hope that you understand that we're speaking from an area where we love what we have, and we're trying to protect that feel. And so I would really urge you to, as people have spoken before, really consider, think about traffic safety, think about the sewage, you know, to think about and to delay making any decisions until you have that safety plan or that information from the city, because people have brought up the question, who's going to pay for that? And there is the cost, but there's also just having to live with it. All of us live with streets that flood. It happens. And you can live with it, obviously we do, but it does start decreasing quality of life. Sewage problems I don't even want to think about, personally. But again, it's not just a cost to the city in terms of dollars and cents, it's also the quality of life from everyone else that is going to be impacted by that potential development. So with that, thank you. I hope that was brief enough.
Any questions? Nope.
Nope, okay.
Thank you.
You guys are brief too, so congratulations.
Anybody else? Would you like to address this again, or do you think you sufficiently, it's up to you if you want to take a minute or so to answer some of the concerns?
I'll also be brief. Maybe Jared can speak to some of these things more technically. You know, I won't address a lot of the comments obviously related to infrastructure and traffic.
Sure, yeah, but
which-
you can't do anything about it.
Right, and we will talk about it. I do want to state for the record, when we talk about things like, you know, pedestrians and their safety and how they're going to cross the street, you know, you should all know that we care just as much as you all care about that too. Obviously, that's a, you know, primary concern of ours, and I look forward to the process, you know, to address that. I also want to say that there's a reason why we don't have balconies on these buildings. I'm glad that was addressed tonight. You know, we will be investing quite a bit in this building, and we have a pride of ownership in all of our buildings. We don't have balconies because we don't want bicycles on balconies, and we don't want things that you probably, you know, all wouldn't like either. We absolutely have dumpsters, and not only that, in many of our properties, actually, probably most of our properties, we have valet trash today, because we don't want trash sitting in hallways and messing up our property either. I would like to say when the first Miss Bissonnette, when she spoke about the community, I was thinking that I respect that immensely, that you have neighborhood get-togethers and that sort of thing, and I really hope, and I genuinely hope, that we could be part of the neighborhood, that some of those get-togethers could be in our lobby. And I really, you know, dispute the last lady that mentioned that. There is a reason why we don't plan to have a street full of retail and come here and say, we're going to bring in all these shops, and then oftentimes you see those ending up empty, and they're just, you know, whatever. Someone will put a fitness center. You know, we've really designed this, that's a project that is economically feasible, that we want to build, and we want to get started, and we think that it can be part of the community. How we've dropped it in scale as you get closer to the more dense residential part, and we really hope you consider that, and we appreciate the consideration.
All right. Thank you.
I'll just go through real quickly. I wrote down a lot of the points as they were being mentioned, and just to talk about a few of those. As far as land uses, I think it, you know, as Graham mentioned, we were very intentional in the way that we laid out the property so that we could go from a higher density, higher building across the street to a lower density and then get to the neighborhood in the backyards. The maximum height even of the townhome buildings is 35 feet. Several of the historic homes with the extreme roof pitches that happen, you know, do reach a height that is very similar in height to that. And I think that's why the height restriction was placed on the property in the first place. So this does respond well in height to, you know, the direct relationship to the backyards and the properties that are to the south. As far as the street improvements, again, once the traffic study is complete, and when we're very comfortable with that being a condition of this approval, that the traffic study is complete and that we work with city staff on how to mitigate any traffic impacts that this property has on the surrounding area. Along with that will be the improvements to the streets along the property lines. This was an early concept site plan. If the city has a requirement that along our property, which would actually be to the railroad track along the side here, that we add a sidewalk, that is something that we would definitely do. It's just a matter of, you know, going through that process. Some of the things that were talked about in terms of infrastructure, certainly those are all things that as you're getting ready to do a development like this, there's a process to going through, and this is the first step. After we go through this, then we have to work through very closely with engineering, with city staff to make sure that everything is taken care of because, you know, as Graham mentioned, you know, the last thing we want to do is have a negative impact on the neighborhood behind us in terms of a sewage backup or stormwater. Stormwater is something that, you know, is brought up often, and we talk about that because that is something that you know, we have to make sure that we don't have a negative impact on our neighbors when it comes to stormwater. So through the course of the design process, that will be reviewed entirely so that we cannot make the properties adjacent to us have a negative impact. And in fact, we typically usually end up improving the situation because we provide to, in most cases, we will end up treating that stormwater as it's being collected on site. So we do have to work with engineers to make that happen. But as a part of the due diligence process, that typically doesn't happen before we get to this stage of making sure that zoning is approvable. Maintenance of the property, Graham touched on the fact that we don't have balconies on the design because we don't like to see, you know, things left out on the balconies as well. And I can tell you, you know, the rail development is very proud of the properties that they own, and they are very strict on making sure that they are well cared for. You can, and please visit their website and visit their other properties, but it is true. We've talked about the city infrastructure. In terms of the historic preservation aspect of the property, again, by citing the property as we have, we've tried to be very respectful of the Main Street corridor. And as we drove through, and then also with the West Clark Street, trying to maintain the walkability and the visual appeal of Clark Street, which I think that we have done a good job of proposing. Some of the things that were brought up earlier about the configuration of Clark Street and having the 11 parking spaces and having the street meander through and traffic, you know, parking shifting from side to side. Part of the reason that we proposed doing that was, in fact, to slow down traffic, to provide kind of cloistered, safe parking zones along the street so that they are dedicated parking spots. It's not just a wide street where people can park along the entire strip. And it responds to where there are drives coming in and out of Clark Street as well, so that there might be cars parked on the opposite side from where the existing apartment community that's on Clark Street has its parking entrance, where we have proposed entrances, so that we can, and we would work with staff on exactly the final configuration of that street. But that was the concept that we wanted to follow with that. Parking on site is not charged, so that is something that that was brought up as a question.
Well, no, that's not entirely true. It's preliminary right now, but certainly the covered parking there will be a charge, which is common here. But we haven't determined the final resolution on all of it.
Okay. And then again, the community spaces provided on the property are truly meant, and it is a strong desire to invite the community into the space. That is why it's a public, addressed as a public coffee shop or cafe or whatever it ends up being finally, so that we can invite people in. And are there any other questions?
Do you have any questions? Mr. Turner?
I had a couple. Just one, in other developments that you have done, you talked a bit about timing of things, having this happen first and then doing some of the engineering studies. In other developments, has it happened flipped, where some of these studies are done first and then it comes back to Plan Commission?
No, it's typically done this way, where we've been able to go in, secure the zoning, and approval for zoning, and then, because there is a significant cost impact with getting those studies done and doing all the investigation that has to happen.
Okay.
So
And then
it's typically this way.
secondly, I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly or not, but am I remembering that you're from Northbrook? You're Northbrook-based development?
We're Dallas, Texas.
You're in
based.
Dallas.
Yeah.
Okay, Dallas. So I wasn't remembering that. Something else I was reading.
Yeah.
Were there other developments in Champaign-Urbana that you have done as well, or is this the first for Champaign-Urbana? And how did you choose Champaign-Urbana for this?
Yeah. No, this is the first for Champaign-Urbana, but we have projects nationwide from North Carolina to Washington State, so we develop all over the country.
And how did you come across this? How did you decide on this community?
Yeah, well, you know, our business is to locate, you know, attractive sites in places that are either growing or, you know, this particular site is a perfect model for us because it is in a key location. It's a growing university. We've got the hospital. There's visibility, and you know, then we saw a very underutilized site, so it just felt like a very strong redevelopment site for us.
Thank you.
Checked all the boxes.
Great. Any further questions? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now I'll close the public input portion of the hearing, and we'll go into some discussion. Any thoughts?
I was going to
Mr.
ask
Ackerson?
Lou, so I'm sorry.
Oh, you're going to ask Lou to
Yeah, I was going to ask Lou because I had not considered, I did not do my research on B3U, so.
Well, yeah, I
wanted to-
was looking all through the table of uses.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lou.
So let me preface this by saying that I think a project like this is appropriate for this location. The problem I have is our mechanism for permitting and approving it. At the moment, the property along University, which is the north half of this site essentially, is already B3. B3 has no height restriction. And I think we are potentially in our, what I think of as standard problem, that we are talking about a proposal and being asked to vote on a rezoning. And in effect, this proposal is only an instance of something that could be created that might be sort of useful information to consider in making a rezoning decision. But the rezoning decision is really about what the zone would be. And I understand that my impression is we are trying to do this in order to create a single zoning parcel so that we can get a project that's somewhat coherent, which, you know, setting aside various problems at the moment, this is a reasonably coherent project. But as I said last time, and I've said many times before, I've been on the commission long enough to have gone through these things, where we make a zoning change in the face of the proposed project, and the proposed project doesn't happen. So I'm reluctant to make a rezoning of the entire block to B3 on the basis of this project, not so much because I'm, you know, completely concerned about this particular project, but because I'm concerned about what B3 could be by right for the next project that comes along. And B3 by right doesn't even allow residential. You know, for those of you who don't like this in your backyard, this is actually pretty nice to be in your backyard compared to what could be done under B3 by right. You might want to encourage the staff because if it got built, it would protect you from something else. Because at the moment on University Avenue, if the lot were big enough, they could build without height restriction. So that's the first case.
Yeah, let me
Okay,
just
the
jump in
second
real
ca-
quick and say that I like this tack. I meant to say something about this. These are two different cases. One's a zone and one's a use permit, and we should deal with them separately. So I like
Well,
that.
okay, but I'm gonna deal with them as two separate sets of
Related.
commentary,
Yeah.
not deal with one and then deal with the other.
No, that's
'cause
fine.
I think
How
how we might act on them is also
Your points are well
related.
taken.
So that's sort of my concern about the zoning case.
Can I just jump in real quick
Yeah.
too? When this came to us, and I can't remember, this parcel came to us to be rezoned
Before, yeah.
in the last year and a half, two,
I don't know. It's
something
been
like
here
that.
a few times.
I wasn't here, so it was a while ago.
Was it? It seemed that one of the issues we had was we didn't want it to be rezoned because we didn't have a plan. At
That's
that
kind
point,
of wrong.
I mean, to a certain extent, it got to, we couldn't envision what it could necessarily be, and didn't we talk about wanting more of a plan in order to move forward with? That's what I remember about it, but.
I think we had vague promises, and I think to Lou's point, that we have to look at the whole zone and not vague promises or any plan. actually.
True,
Yeah.
right, very true.
So, go ahead.
So on the special use permit, when we do a special use permit, we put conditions, typically.
Mhm.
One of those conditions is development shall be constructed in general conformance with attached site plans and renderings, which usually it doesn't say.
Mhm.
And in my view, we do not have a site plan. And that makes me a little reluctant to approve the special use permit. Now, add to this, I've been trying to find a solution to this because this corner should be developed. And something close to this, similar to this, like this, is potentially appropriate. But I cannot find a zoning category that would allow the extended stay hotel, but would have a height limit.
Not if it's all B3.
No, what I mean is, we have no category, we have no
That's
zoning
correct.
district that allows an extended stay hotel that has a height limit.
Correct.
And I would be, in contrast to some of the people speaking, and it's not that I haven't heard this before, or some of you may know my background. 5 stories might be okay. But again, we're not approving a project. We're making a zoning decision. And my reaction is, unlimited height is not okay. And I can't figure out a way to deal with that. So I'm sort of looking for help.
I understand. So I was going through I think same as you, going through the table of uses and looking at the different districts, and you can't have a hotel. So that, the only possible way, which shoots the whole thing down, is if, and I don't even know if this is possible, but if we leave the B3 where it is and make the rest of it maybe B2, and then, so
No,
then in the
well,
backside, you're
no,
35 feet, and you could go,
So
well, the floor area ratio might limit the height of the front part.
I think there are a couple of ways we might be able to do it. But I think part of it is we have to create an aggregated parcel. And
Probably.
I cannot remember whether we can create an aggregated parcel under the PUD ordinance, or whether we can, I'm looking for options. I'd like to see this site developed. I think we've got some ideas about the kinds of things that can be developed.
Well, I want to thank you for articulating some of the things that we at staff level, of course, discussed at
Surprise,
length.
surprise.
So you're right, there's not a perfect zoning district. Just to address a question that was kind of directed at us, just real quickly if I can, whereas there's technically no height limit in B3, its FAR maximum is only
Correct.
4, and there's a parking requirement, so there's practical limitations to the height. Just wanted to make sure that you're making that connection. But
Yeah, I
in
wasn't,
terms-
and thank you.
So in terms of an aggregated parcel, do you mean, can we treat this all as one lot, even if it has separate zoning, and then do a PUD over it? Is that sort of your
That's what I'm
question?
asking.
Yeah.
Yes, and we did do that at the Lincoln and Nevada site. That site only had 2 zoning districts to contend with. One of the parcels, underlying parcels, had a lower zoning district than the bulk of it. So how we address things like FAR is that we did we asked the architect to specifically calculate sort of a weighted ratio of all the requirements. I mean, it's
But
not
is that the
simple.
proposal that was
The one
turned
that's-
down, or the one that was built?
That was the by right. So how we address the
It was
different.
done as a PUD by right, under
It was
the-
done as a it was requested as a PUD, which did not go forward.
right.
But it was approved as a by right with different zoning districts under one, what we would call a zoning lot.
Okay, all right, so that can be done.
it-
Or has been done.
It has been done, and it's not easy.
So,
I don't know where we go from here, but I'd like to do more work on this, I guess is my answer.
yeah, I think we have to.
Can we continue?
I want to echo that the need to redevelop this, the need to also protect the historic district, and to try to find some way to do those two things, I think, is at the top of my mind. The other thing is that, I've driven through there several times, and I understand that the concerns of getting in and out of there.
Yeah.
It doesn't look easy. And to stack more parking along there and things of that nature, it would be awfully congested.
Yeah, I would want to see a traffic study. I think that'd be. very-
Well, and so that's a good requirement there. The other thing I was going to ask city staff is, can we require a stormwater management plan?
It is required.
uh,
They have to do one anyway.
I don't think so for this size of a parcel. I thought it had to be like 5 acres or something like that. A stormwater management plan.
It's not as big as 5 acres. I think it's in the neighborhood of 1 or 2.
Oh. Well, would this parcel qualify, or if it doesn't, could we require it as
Yeah,
part of
we-
the special use? Yeah, I
Well,
think we
under
can.
the special use.
I think we
but
can.
then it's, that's another whole.
Sure, if we go that, if we go that route.
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of the discussion. I was trying to explain what a rezoning versus a special use was to the applicant to make sure they understood the discussion fully here.
Our lingo, yeah.
But in terms of stormwater, how that happens is, it's, do we have a site, how big the site is? Do you know off the top of your head? It's over an acre. Let us check the ordinance. I think the trigger is an acre. But basically, you need
Oh,
to.
I thought it was a lot bigger. I could be wrong.
It's not significantly bigger.
Okay, yeah.
And basically what happens is you then need to do stormwater for above and beyond what's already pervious. So you would, the engineers would look at this and determine how much of the stormwater would need to be dealt with.
Yeah, right. Okay. So what do we want to do? Sounds like we'd like for more work to be done. And sounds like a continuance is where we're headed. I'd rather not reject it
Yeah,
outright.
So let's get advice from staff here.
That's, yes. I thought I was looking at staff.
Two things. Oh, my.
Yeah, right. No, we got it.
So,
Yeah, what do you think?
procedurally,
Yeah.
what's the best way to deal with where we are?
right.
Well, if you wanted to help us make sure that we understand the commission's main issues, that would be helpful, since we heard a lot of different issues tonight. To do something like a planned unit development is a separate process. We'd have to re-advertise and do that differently. But if you wanted us to try to go back and have the developer mitigate or address any of the issues that you have, then that's certainly something that we could do. Other things, like, I'll just throw that out there, changing B3 to have a height limit. Obviously, that's a separate process,
That's a lot
which would
bigger
also
than
have
this.
a,
But could,
Well,
what I was curious, what were you saying? I didn't comprehend fully what you were saying. No, there's not a height limit, but that can be dealt with floor area
Kevin
ratio.
can take that up.
Explain that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the B3 district has a 4.0 floor area ratio, which effectively limits the height. So if you built, just hypothetically, you could build a 4-story building that covers the entire site. So, effectively you're limited to 4 stories if you filled up the entire site. As it stands, this has a floor area ratio just under 3.5, so they haven't gone as tall as perhaps they could, but the tallest building you could build on the site would not be much taller than is
So
proposed.
I think that goes to your issue, Lou, because you're saying we're not approving their proposal, we're approving rezoning.
Potential.
And potential rezoning.
Correct.
Yes, then what we're
In the first
considering
case,
is rezoning, is in the first case. Right. So
But-
just dealing with the zoning issue, would that address the concern?
It's something I hadn't taken into account, and I need to think through. But it does not actually limit the height. The smaller the building you make, the smaller the footprint of the building, the taller the building can be. And you've got, whatever this site is, on the order of an acre, we think, I don't know. I mean,
It says an acre and a half.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, okay. So you could build a small but pretty tall building.
Could I
Like
also
the
add
South
something to
Club.
what Kevin noted? One thing that we've failed to mention is you often will see a 5-story building, 4 stories of residential, above 1 story of commercial, because beyond that, the building code gets much more expensive to build. So, and the architect could probably say a lot more about that than I could, but that is why you see 5-story buildings and not 6-story buildings, because of the added cost for, and I don't remember the kind of construction that's called, high-rise
Going up,
construction.
yeah.
So that also plays into it, as well as the parking. Obviously, the more you build, the more parking you have to build. So all of those components really do affect what, in reality, the height could be. even if there's not a number listed on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is the FAR and B3U the same?
That's none. No, no. Oh, FAR is 4. Yeah, I looked at that. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, okay.
And there's no height restriction. Yeah.
So,
Issues
What-
we'd like
what-
to see addressed, yeah.
yeah, so I think we've been asked for two things. One is issues we like to see addressed, but, so one of the things, I need to do some more homework, but also the procedural options of how to get a project we want without opening up possibilities
That we don't.
through zoning that we don't want. And I just would like to be clearer on that than I am, which is partly my work, but I'd like staff help.
Yeah, and this might be the weirdest lot in the city, so. So I think issues we'd like to see addressed are the height of the building, that the developers can do something about.
Okay.
Something about, something that, I don't know if it could be through design or what, but
Well,
something.
and we're not necessarily saying that we think it's too high, 5 is too high. We're just saying, at least right now, what I'm hearing is that for B3, the potential for higher is what we're concerned about.
I think what I'm concerned about the opposition from the neighbors, but
Certainly.
I'm more concerned about the density that 5 stories brings. I think that's, from a planning perspective, the most valid point on that. I am concerned about the traffic patterns and the parking. The traffic patterns, I don't know what you do. I mean, the testimony is right. You're going to try to find a way out of that neighborhood that doesn't force you to go left. I don't know if there's anything we can do about that or not, but it's a concern for the redevelopment of this particular spot. And if IDOT owns there's no way to get there off of University, right? I mean, there's no way, right? You can't go across the tracks. You can't cross IDOT land.
Well, you can come down Busey.
Well, you could come down Busey. That's what they're doing now.
Well, but I
Yeah.
mean, from University, you can turn right
You
and
can turn right on. Yeah, sure.
I think part of the traffic question is not just a traffic impact analysis, but what are the city's plans for Busey, Kohler, Clark, including Clark and the block between Busey and Kohler, because Kohler has a traffic light on
Mm-hmm.
University, if I'm
Right,
not
it
mistaken.
does, yes.
Busey does not, and Busey is not improved from, or
It's
like my neighborhood, not improved between Clark and University.
right.
Um,
That was one of my concerns as well.
But could be. So,
This is not something for the developer, but every time we talk about parking, we assume everybody has a car, and I think we should not assume everybody has a car. When we're and especially when we're talking about an area that's appropriate for a certain level of density. But traffic is I know this area very well. I've often taken the bus and walked down Kohler to go to the South Clinic or the hospital for treatment. So, and because I live with someone who does not drive, I'm very sensitive to the issues of whenever you talk about traffic, and I think we need a traffic study. I'd also like to see addressed use of mass transit, because if students are going to go south to the university, there's students living much farther north of Lincoln who largely take the bus down, and they're traveling much greater distance, but they're taking the bus. So if we could identify what's the mass transit and what those options are, and where's a safe place for somebody to cross. For example, how do you get to Einstein Bagels? I know how you get to Einstein Bagels. You go up the traffic light, you cross over there. It's a very busy intersection.
It's still a long walk.
But you're not going to, if you cross in the middle of Lincoln, You're asking for
No.
trouble. I've parked it, it's the, you guys call it the Einstein Bagels building. I call it, that's university property. I go to offices over there. The bagel shop just happens to be in the bottom.
Yeah.
But I know I know that street very, very well, and all the concerns about Clark and trying to take a right, no problem, trying to take a left, it can't be done. So then you're talking about either Busey or Kohler feeding into those areas. So I think the traffic, for me, is the biggest issue, but whenever we talk about traffic, I'd like to include some discussion or analysis of where does mass transit fit with all this. I don't see kids walking from here to the campus, but I do see them taking buses. I say kids, you know.
They'll ride those blue bikes.
The blue bike, right?
Don't start on the blue bikes.
All right, anything else that we want?
So what are we doing?
I think we're getting ready to continue it. But
mean,
I want to,
If I may, so I think I've got some ideas, but I want to flesh those out before publicly stating them.
oh, I figured that's a good idea.
So it sounds like a continuation is something that you're discussing. And I'm not sure, I think some of the ideas that I'm thinking about, we could at least have an initial discussion and come back in 2 weeks. And if that doesn't work out, then we could just automatically continue it.
Sure.
So we could keep everybody informed so that you know whether or not to come to the meeting. But I think keeping a tight time frame is important for the
Yeah, I agree.
developer's standpoint, and see if we can make that work. And if we can't, then we'll move on to Plan B. But I've got some ideas that could potentially be a quick turnaround, I think.
Okay. Well, I think for
Do we have to?
we're going to move it. We'll move it, second it, and voice vote it.
Can I just say
Ms. Yu?
that we talked a lot about traffic, but is there a way we can kind of initially address some of the residents' concern about stormwater and sewer? Would those information be provided for our next discussion?
We can get more details, sorry, Kevin. We can get more details on the sanitary sewer in this area and get the code language. Basically, we have the requirements in place that, for sanitary and for storm sewer. We can just make sure that's available to you so that you know what is required. Because it is true that a developer at this stage is just trying to get the conceptual plan approved, and then they need to meet all the codes, but that happens at the building permit stage. But we can at least provide you with the requirements so that you know what's required.
Yeah, further information would be good, and
Yeah.
and if the city engineers got an opinion at this stage, that would probably be good as well. So we'll need a motion for continuance.
I move.
Moved by
Cases.
2361M18?
2361M18 and 2362SU18 be continued.
to the next regular meeting.
What do we have to say? To the
Date
next
certain?
regular meeting?
Do we need a date
Or
certain?
do we need a date certain?
Either way, the next regular
Okay, to
meeting
the next regular meeting.
is fine.
Second by Ms. Billman. And we'll do it on a roll call. Oh, yeah.
Ms. Billman? Yes. Mr. Fitch?
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins? Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Ms. Yu?
Yes.
Mr. Ackerson?
Yes.
That, this case is continued to the next regular meeting of the Plan Commission, pending resolution of certain issues, and may be continued again until we've got another proposal. So moving down the agenda then, no. We have no new business. Audience participation. Does anybody wish to address the Plan Commission on something not related to this case that is related to planning? No? Staff report?
There is none.
There is no staff report. There is no study session. Therefore, I'd like to thank everyone for their testimony, but we're adjourned for tonight.